Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube. With the voice, MILT Thompson. Delivering the best of sports programming. Interviews with top celebrities. And the answer to the question, where are they now? And now, MILT Thompson, Playing for Keeps.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Playing for Keeps. I am your host, the voice, MILT Thompson. And as I promised you, we're going to continue with some of the best, well, not some of the best in sports programming around Central Indiana. We're going to do that in the likes of our good friend here, Leonard Hoops, today. Leonard has an esteemed background and has really kind of run Visit Indy with an ironclad fist over the last 11 years. But we're going to explore with him a little bit about what Visit Indy does in terms of attracting the crowds and making sure things go well when we have visitors from out of state. Of course, you know, with the pandemic last year, it made it very, very difficult for almost all kinds of organizations, particularly ones that had as its foundation traveling to and from, particularly in the travel industry and in the hospitality industry, which is what Visit Indy is built on. You know, I want to thank eSpot and particularly Jiffy Lube for joining in and sponsoring these wonderful shows. And I want to also thank you viewers out there for what you've already done and shown to us. You know, I'm getting, just over the last 4 shows, we're getting comments like, Milt, we really love the behind the scenes action that you're showing us. You're letting us know what's going on in the world of sports that we didn't even know about. All the way from amateur sports, all the way to professional sports, all the way to that, where are they now? In particular, we've gotten some very, very, very good comments about your watching Ray Tolbert, former Mr. Basketball in Indiana, and also the NCAA championship with IU in 1981, and then going on to also win a ring with Magic Johnson and the Los Angeles Lakers. Those are the kind of stories you're going to continue to get. But today we're going to have a special guest that knows more about behind the scenes than almost anybody, and we're going to talk to him right after these short words. We'll be right back on Playing for Keeps.
Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube. Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube.
Welcome back to Playing for Keeps. I am your host, the voice, MILT Thompson, and here we are with my good friend, Leonard Hoops. Leonard Hoops is the president of Visit Indy, an august organization here in town, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know him very, very well over the last 11 years. Leonard, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me, Milton. It's been a pleasure to work with you the last close to 11 years now as a board member. You've been on our board, and let me congratulate you for being the winner of the Charles Whistler Award. I know that breakfast is coming up soon.
Well, that's a very humbling thing, and thank you so much for, I think, buying a table from the Greater Indianapolis Project Committee. I'm very humbled by that award and glad that folks will be able to celebrate with us.
Well deserved, my friend.
Well, thank you so much. Leonard, hoops. I mean, you know, I grew up playing hula hoops, but I didn't know very much about it. Your background is very interesting. Tell us a little bit about your family background and what ultimately brought you from San Francisco to Indianapolis.
Well, with a last name like Hoops, spelled just like basketball hoops, a lot of people think it's a foregone conclusion I was going to get this job when the opportunity presented itself back in 2011. And I certainly have a name meant for basketball without question. This is a great basketball state. But Hoops is a very, it's not a common name. It's an old English name. My father's side of the family came over here from Yorkshire, England in 1683. So I've got a very long history on that English side for hundreds of years in the States when they came over. But my mother is East Indian. So I always, I'm one of those people who's got the 2 very different cultural backgrounds. I was actually born on the island of Trinidad, where my mom is from in the Caribbean, and grew up in Texas and California. And through a variety of things, I was a sports writer. In college, I was a journalism undergrad with the desire to basically go to a lot of sporting events. I was like, hey, wouldn't this be great to have a career where you get to go to Super Bowls and Final Fours and Indy 500s and things like that? But I thought I was going to be doing that through the sports writing path. And instead, I somehow wound my way about 27 years ago into this convention and tourism industry, and lo and behold, I still got to go to Super Bowls and Indy 500s and the Final Fours and things of that nature, just in a totally different way.
Well, folks, Leonard is not only one of the most intelligent people that I've known, smartest guys I've known, he's actually pretty funny. I think he kind of wound his way through comedy, and at one point it was stand-up, now it's sit-down comedy. Tell us about that,
Well,
Leonard.
you've been the victim of it a few times at board meetings where I decided to just break out a line or two. But in high school and college, I did some stand-up, and a lot of my friends were really pushing me, hey, you need to go try out for SNL or be a writer or something like that. And I don't know, maybe I'm too pragmatic to do it, so I found other forums to do it. But the last couple of years, I've gotten back into it. A friend of mine, Scott Long, who lives up in Hamilton County, is a professional comedian. He tours the country. He's been a writer for Frank Caliendo, people like that. And he does this annual quote-unquote celebrity comedy night, typically at Crackers. And a couple of years ago, he asked me to do it. And I was the most Z-list of celebrities you can get. I mean, you can't get a lesser celebrity on a celebrity show than me. But having said that, I was actually pretty decent at it. And it went well. And the next thing you know, I got asked back for another one. And there's a couple times now that I've actually opened for Scott or been the feature, the guy right before the headliner at Crackers since doing this celebrity night. And so it's a hobby. I need an outlet every now and again, you know, to drop a line or two.
From all the grueling work that you've got at Visit Indy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're going to all these events and, you know, having to take people out to dinner for crying
My
out loud,
goodness,
you know.
I'd like to be the recipient of more of those opportunities to go to some of the events with you sometimes. And I'll even be your valet if necessary.
I'm happy to have you as my plus one.
I'll carry your bags anytime, Leonard. Leonard, you know, the Convention and Visitors Bureau world is sometimes a little bit unknown to people because they're behind the scenes a lot, but you also have a component that's out in front. So how do you reconcile those two kind of approaches to your world?
Well, I didn't even know these types of organizations existed until I was nearly 30. I had been in the corporate world for 7 years in a public relations and corporate communications type of a job, and an opening came up for the San Jose Convention and Visitors Bureau. It's like, what do these entities do? They were separate from a Chamber of Commerce, and you know, but I quickly realized they're basically the main sales and marketing agency for a city, the branding agency for a city. They're independent entities, 501c6s, typically a nonprofit type of status that gets typically some level of government funding. Visit Indy has been around since 1923. So we're coming up on our 100-year anniversary here in the next year and a half. Actually, a year and a month, I guess it is. And, you know, so a lot of things have happened in that century that Visit Indy has been around. We were actually a top convention destination going back to the 1920s. And the reason for that is that back in the day before airline hubs, the cities that were the big convention cities were train hubs. And of course we had Union Station, still do, but not in the same sort of manner that it's utilized in 2021 as it was, say, in the late 1920s. And so over the years, you know, the impact of our organization has been very high, then it's waned, and now it's being back to very high again. The convention center was opened in 1972. It's been expanded 5 times. We have on the books a 6th expansion that we expect to break ground in 2022. And then we do a lot of things that people don't realize, like Sports Corp, of course, is very well known, Indiana Sports Corp, for the sporting events here. But in 99% of the events that Sports Corp does, we play the role of booking the venues, of setting up the hotel contracts, and of working through a lot of the details on the front end to make the bid work. And then they typically put together the local organizing committee that will run the event. And so there's a lot of kind of symbiotic relationships we have with them and with other organizations to make a lot of these big sporting events work.
Well, the convention center is also an interesting venue for lots of sporting events.
Sure.
I mean, everything from volleyball to boxing, and you name it, has revealed itself there, manifested. What's your relationship and how you manage that and also get along with the kind of eventing business? Yeah,
so we're a pretty big convention city. You know, we a few years ago in 2014, USA Today ranked us the #1 convention city. And they haven't updated that survey since then, and we hope they never do. We'll stay #1. That's been a nice marketing push for us. We're not the biggest, but that says we're the best, at least according to that source. And so it's a great venue. All the hotels are connected. You've got Lucas Oil Stadium connected. So that lends itself to a lot of sporting events. We do a lot of things like volleyball tournaments, youth basketball, gymnastics, cheerleading. And frankly, that's the sort of stuff that kept us going during the pandemic. We started having events in July of 2020 when virtually nobody else in the country is. It was like Indy and Orlando were the only two major cities that were doing these kinds of events back to last summer. And so you had these indoor sports that kept us going. We even had Irish dancers Thanksgiving week of 2020, which was supposed to be happening in the Chicago area, but Chicago wasn't having any events. And so we got them in Indianapolis. And so there's a lot of things like that. With the NCAA tournament, that was quite the undertaking because we had been successful with all these youth sporting events in the summer, fall, and winter. We actually had to move groups kind of secretly behind the scenes in November and December out of March and April so we could make the entire NCAA tournament happen. And so it was very interesting being on in a non-disclosure type of thing in November through early December with the NCAA trying to make this stuff happen, and then reading about the speculation on ESPN and local news and knowing exactly what was happening but not being able to say a darn thing about it.
Well, a couple weeks ago we had Ryan Vaughn on to talk about the generalities of it and how the behind-the-scenes negotiations took place with the NCAA. There were some times there weren't quite as dramatic as it might seem. Behind the scenes, you and the Capital Improvement Board had some negotiations, and that relationship with the Capital Improvement Board all the time about how we finance these things and make all that fit, hoteliers and all the other. How do you get in the mix and bring all these things together, Leonard?
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. I mean, at the end of the day, I rocked in the fetal position a few nights in the month of November. And but you get up the next day and you say, we're going to figure this out today, and sometimes you do, and sometimes it takes another day. And Andy Mallon was just terrific at the CIB. He and I were on the phone with each other all the time for pretty much a month, along with some senior officials at the NCAA and then the hoteliers. We had to clear the decks inside the convention center because essentially that became an entire student campus. They had a movie theater in there, they had practice courts, they had classrooms, and the whole building had to be cleared out. And then we had to work through logistically with several of the hotels that are connected to the center to create a quasi-bubble. For all intents and purposes, you know, the NCAA used the term controlled environment, but it was like everybody was seeing with the NBA bubble in Orlando. It was something similar to that, where you had to figure out a way to keep these athletes and the coaches and the other folks who had to be inside that bubble as safe as possible. And it worked pretty well, right? I mean, we only had one game canceled when it was all said and done that affected a couple of teams. And at the end of the day, that turned out to be a really, really amazing effort on behalf of so many different organizations. I mean, I think back to myself, if there were 1,000 top possible scenarios, we were probably in the 999th group, 99.9 percentile of how that could have turned out for us.
Well, you and I share some time on the Capital Improvement Board together, and we're going to promise to have Andy Mallon on the show. It's part of the financing background of all of our facilities, including the convention center, including Lucas Oil Stadium, and now Gainbridge Fieldhouse, along with their management. How does sometimes countervailing attitudes work between Visit Indy and the pricing matrix that you are the developer of, and how we compete with other cities?
So in the convention business, somewhere in the last 30 years, we got a little bit overbuilt as an industry. And anytime you have more supply than there is demand, you're going to put some pressure on pricing, right? It doesn't make a difference if you're talking about TV sets or cars or convention business. And so we started developing pricing models that, back in the olden days, 30 years ago, in the convention world, you had a set price, and that was the price, and that's what you paid. But as there became this demand, kind of imbalance between supply and demand in our industry, we started saying, hey, how do we price ourselves the way, say, an airline ticket is priced or the way a hotel room is priced? Variable pricing. And so we've been doing that at Visit Indy now for the last 10 and a half years in conjunction with the center. And, we look at things like, what date is it? Obviously, you shouldn't pay as much to meet between Christmas and New Year's as you would in the middle of the summer. In a place like Indianapolis, you're going to get a better deal if we can fill in these hard-to-fill dates. You're not going to pay as much as if you bring us 50,000 or 60,000 attendees, because the tax benefits of those attendees and the overall spending and the job creation is going to be far greater than if a group comes in with 1,000 attendees. And so we actually have 14 variables in our matrix that we look at for how we price a building.
What a dynamic piece. But then 2020 comes along, we have a pandemic, everything changes. So with Bleaky Dillon Crandall, our sponsors, and eSpot, our sponsors, and Jiffy Lube, our main sponsor, we're going to come back and talk about that part with Leonard Hoops, right here on Playing for Keeps.
Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube. Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube.
Welcome back to Playing for Keeps. I am your host, the voice, Milt Thompson. And Steve Sanner, Jiffy Lube. Are you out there? I know you are. We first called, right, Kelly and Susan, and we called on Steve. He said, I'm in. If Milt's going to do another television show, I'm going to be in. So Jiffy Lube, thank you so much for your sponsorship. We're developing more opportunities for people out there, so I know that you'll want to join us and be a part of this experiment that we call the best in Indiana sports. Anyway, we're here with Leonard Hoops, the irrepressible Leonard Hoops, comedian, businessman, executive, creator of a pricing matrix, had everything going. Everything was going great here in the convention business was number one. I'm a believer in first, best, and only. We were getting to be pretty much close to all those threes, which becomes a monopoly.
Yeah.
And then, boom, right out of the clear blue sky, a pandemic.
Yeah.
No one can control it. I mentioned a couple weeks ago talking to Paul Nettig, force majeure wasn't even negotiated in contracts because is it an act of God or not? All that said, this dynamic piece of business is interrupted. What do you do as leader of this organization?
Yeah, without question, one of the industries most hurt by the pandemic has been convention and tourism business, and not just in Indianapolis, but globally. There's been a few segments in the industry, outdoor in particular, so camping and state parks and things like that did okay. But if you're all the major urban centers with big convention centers, with big venues, with 1,000+ room hotels like our JW Marriott, just got crushed during the pandemic, frankly. And so there didn't look to be an end in sight. And back to your point about we were doing so well. 2019 was a record year for us. We had nearly 30 million visitors come to Indianapolis. They spent $5.8 billion. We were nearly $6 billion.
That's B with a B.
B with a B, billion with a B, and it was generating more than 80,000, nearly 85,000 full-time equivalent jobs in central Indiana. So there were a lot of people who were depending on this industry for their incomes, to pay their mortgages, to pay for their schools, kids to go to school, for their cars, whatever, for their Jiffy Lube, for whatever. That were very much impacted by the pandemic because hotels shut down, the center shut down April, May, and June. Andy Mallon and I got together and we started working with Dr. Kane and other health officials, state-level health officials as well, and said, hey, Target's still open. They're considered essential, and Kroger's still open. They're considered essential. There's got to be a way to safely host these events if it's safe enough to go shopping in these places. And Dr. Kane basically said, look, we're going to give you a chance. Work with your customers. If you can do this and we don't have any major outbreaks or something like that, you'll have a second chance, and then maybe a third. Long story short, we got some volleyball and basketball tournaments into the building. Basketball first. They went well. There weren't any outbreaks. They were pretty much it was just the athletes that were in the building and the referees and maybe a few coaches and families were in the hotels and things like that. So we were very cautious. We weren't this wasn't a Sturgis motorcycle rally. We weren't throwing caution to the wind. But one event led to 2, which led to 10, which led to 100. And the next thing you know, by the time the NCAA came calling in November to start discussing the tournament for March and April, we'd already hosted dozens of events, so we'd already had proof of concept. And we, as I mentioned earlier, we're one of the few cities, along with Orlando, that we're figuring out how to do this safely.
Well, when we had Paul Nettig on from the IHSA, he talked about how Indiana successfully kind of navigated high school sports. Well, we're doing high school sports, we're doing collegiate sports, we're doing professional sports. There's a lot of third-party kind of interveners, if you will, in terms of how you deal with the regulations, to be able to provide these kind of things. How do you work with so many folks, and how do you get them in the same room together to figure out how we're going to be successful?
Yeah, that's always tricky, but that's the nature of this job. The nature of this job is bringing different, sometimes disparate entities together to work things out. So you've always got, I tell people all the time that there's, there's really 4 different entities that are involved in every transaction. You've got your customer that wants the least expensive deal possible and the least restrictions possible. You've got your business partners that want the most possible spending. You know, you want the highest rate paid at the convention center, and the highest rate paid at the hotels, and the most spent at the restaurants and things like that. You've got these government entities that are more focused on kind of the tax benefits and the jobs that are created and things of this nature. And then you've got this fourth variable, which might be things like health departments that are not typically, it's typically more of a mayor's office or a CIB you're working with, but then you have to sometimes get involved with you know, during RFRA, for example, we had to get involved with national entities because some people were advocating for a boycott in 2015 of Indiana because of what they saw as a law that was discriminatory with the RFRA. And so bringing those four together, it's, you know, it's like kind of Freakonomics 101. They all got their different motivators and drivers that impact them. But that's what we do. We ultimately try to find some common ground among all of them. What price can you live with, customer? What price can you live with convention center and hotels? You know, government entity, are you happy with this deal? Should we bring in another deal? That sort of thing. And so it's definitely, it's what keeps the job interesting. I mean, this is never the same job 2 days in a row.
Well, organizationally, Leonard, you've got a board of directors and you've got a staff. And you've got a staff that some are involved in advertising and marketing, promotions. Others are taking care of the customers when they're into town. You've got a separate division in tourism of Indiana. So tell us about how that organization fits together, how it's managed, and what its next future.
So we have about a $16 million budget pre-pandemic. We're down in the $12 million range now, which is still fairly healthy, given budget cuts with the pandemic. The CIB has not had nearly the tax revenue they've had, you know, in 2019 that they did in 2020 and 2021. And so we went down from 62 to 51 people, which cut our budget a little bit. At the end of the day, we still have what we need to do to get our job done. A lot of entities cut more significantly than us. One of the things that I believe strongly in with Indianapolis is that our best days are still ahead of us, as good as the pre-pandemic years were. When I got to Indy from San Francisco, where I was the #2 guy at their version of Visit Indy called SF Travel, a lot of people were like, I can't believe you're moving to Indianapolis from San Francisco. You know, you got the Golden Gate Bridge and the Pacific Ocean and the Bay. We don't have oceans and mountains in Indy. And my response to every one of those, and I still do it, and I know you've heard it 1,000 times, Milt, as a board member at Visit Indy, but there's some cities that have done all right that don't have oceans and mountains. Paris being one of them. It's a flat city with a river that runs through it. So is Indy. We're a flat city with a river that runs through us. And Paris has done just fine. They're arguably the greatest city brand in the world. Now, Paris has got a 2,000-year head start on us, so we have some work to do to catch up. You know, that's a lot of time to collect some art and build the Eiffel Tower and perfect a croissant. But we've got the kind of know-how and the desire and the talent in central Indiana that really wants to turn Indy into the next big thing. And while we're doing great things now, I still think 50 years or 100 years from now, people are going to look at Indianapolis and go, holy cow, how did Indy become that?
Well, Indy has some things that Paris doesn't have. We have Leonard Hoops for one. But finally, before we depart, we've got a couple other big events that are happening. Got a national championship in football in addition to a Big Ten football championship. Those things are happening as we speak.
Yeah, my wife's super excited. My wife's a University of Michigan grad. So they've obviously had a tough decade, but here they are in the championship game for the Big Ten, and if they win that game, they're going to be in the tournament that could land them in Indianapolis in January for the CFP.
Well, I tell you, isn't this fantastic, folks? We're talking to the definitive, irrepressible voice, the comedic Leonard Hoops. I want to thank every one of you for continuing to watch our show. We look forward to hearing your comments, your letters, watching us on Channel 40 every Friday evening at 9 o'clock, and you can also catch us on YouTube's. Send us your cards and letters, and we thank you so much for tuning in again this week to Playing for Keeps. I am your host, the voice, Milt Thompson.